Welcome to the Purpose for Life podcast. I'm your host, Suzanne Roberts, author of It's Deeper Than That and founder of The Great Reconnection. I'm so excited to have here with us today Julie Cullinane. I know that you are going to be thrilled to listen to her today, and you will learn a lot. So thank you so much, Julie, for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me, Suzanne.
I want to start with a little bit of your journey because I read about you and I was like, wow, okay. And that will help us understand when we get to a deeper question, how you got there from your lived experience. So let's start from graduating from high school at 16.
You know, it's interesting as you and I were doing our centering before this, what was really coming up for me was it's almost like I can picture myself in this long, continuous line of women that started before me and
Mm,
is now extending on beyond me. And just the ones that I know about, my mother and my grandmothers, and, women who were very intelligent and had a lot of things to contribute in a world that didn't really, the systems of that world really weren't set
mm.
up for them to be able to make that contribution. And now I have twin daughters of my own
Oh,
who are kind of extending out the line the other way now, who have more opportunities than I did, more opportunities than the women before me did. So I will place myself
thank
in
you.
that line. Yes, I graduated from high school at the age of 16, graduated from college at 20, entered the working world at a pretty young age, just with a combination of my own drive and ambition and hard work, was able to very quickly rise in the corporate world that I had entered. Ended up going to do my MBA at UCLA with a goal of going into the consulting field, and was able to do that. I was doing quite a bit of work in organizational consulting, so working with large systems that were going through significant changes, and was there as a consultant helping these organizations navigate how to get people aligned around whatever changes that were going on in those organizations, whether it was a large technology implementation
Hmm.
or a merger situation, so on and so forth. So I did that for several years. And then when my husband and I decided that we wanted to start our family, and then were very surprised to learn that we were having twins. And of course, I didn't think that that would be a challenge. I just assumed that I would be able to continue
Oh,
on with my career as it had been. And of course, quickly came to terms with some of my own limitations in being able to do everything at the level that I wanted to. So we tried a few different things. And then when my daughters were 3.5, just decided that I needed to find a way to navigate and be in my career in a way where I had more choice, I had more options. And so I stepped out on my own and started my own consulting business, and that was now about 20 years ago.
well, I appreciate what you're saying. And I also think a lot of women come up against this that
Hmm.
have professional careers and then have a family
Hmm.
and thinking that we should be perfect at both and high level at both. And it's too
Yeah.
much pressure. And I really
Hmm.
appreciate you addressing that and figuring out what matters to me. I was coaching a high level performing woman business owner yesterday, and she realized she was using up all her energy at work. And then by the time she
Hmm.
came home, she didn't have energy for her family. And
Hmm.
that's heartbreaking, right?
Hmm.
Like,
Hmm.
and I appreciate that you had the courage to step out and figure out how to serve your own life in context of the lineage that you're talking about.
Yeah.
That's very compelling. It's interesting that you started with the lineage. I don't hear most people talk like that, and I really appreciate that. And marking your moment in time and what you're generating forward, or we could say, like, what is the legacy you're leaving? It could be wealth, but you're also leaving for your daughter's freedom of choice, which
Yeah.
is different than
That's right.
financial measure. It's a different kind of
Mm-hmm.
measurement, which
Mm-hmm.
they're witnessing through you. And something that you've mentioned a little bit already, but there's a way that you think about these invisible systems of power that impact how perhaps people relate to that power and also then how they relate to themselves. And then also, how can people know their own inner power and what's the difference between those things? I know that was a lot, but I'm going to
Yeah.
let you start wherever you want to start with it, and let's see where you go with it.
Well, one of the questions that you had asked me earlier was, how did I come to be interested in this topic? And about 6 years ago now, I was taking a writing course. I've known for a long time that I wanted to write a book, but I didn't know what the subject matter of that book would be. And I found wonderful writing course called Agenda Free Writing,
Mm,
Writing What Wants to Be Written. And the teacher of that course, one of the things that she had us do was to sit every day and just let a word come up in us and then free write on that word for 10 minutes without self censoring or anything. And it was a really wonderful, very freeing practice. And what I saw over time was that what was wanting to come through me was something about power and the way that I had experienced power in my own life, both ways that I had recognized or not recognized my own power, ways that I,
mm,
as I now say, was leaking, losing, or giving away my power,
mm.
often without realizing it, as well as the systems of power that I had been in mostly unconsciously. I think there's a lot more conversation happening now, more recently, about these systems of power and how these two things interact, as you're saying, kind of our own relationship to our power, the power of others, and then how that interacts with the system. So I
Wait,
spent
before you
about the
keep going,
yeah,
for some
yeah,
of our
sure.
listeners that aren't used to what systems of power is,
Yeah,
what does that mean to you so they
to
know your
me, to me.
context? Yes.
The systems of power that we're in, they can sometimes be very obvious. For example, if you work in an organization where there's a hierarchy, then that is a system of power that is that probably is one that people are the most familiar with. But anytime we are in relationship with others, and there's so much that I could say about this, but anytime that we are in those relationships, there are power dynamics that are happening all around us. And sometimes they are obvious and overt, and sometimes they are more subtle. So an example is the attention economy, right? Where oftentimes we give some of our power away to this system that is continually demanding from us, or feels like it's demanding from us, that we give it our time, that we give it our attention by these cell phone devices that we seem to carry with us all the time. So that's what I mean when I say systems of power, and I could go on and on to say more about kind of the more obvious and the less obvious systems that we are part of.
Okay, thank you.
How do you see it, Suzanne?
Well, I see systems of power operating as power and with dominance and oppression
Yeah.
that came about
Mhm.
through colonization. So, if we look at the four
Mm.
intersecting forms of power, I would say it would be economic exploitation,
Mhm.
race, gender, and religious oppression that
Mhm.
intersect and inform our institutions, inform our social
Mhm.
norms, inform our communities, and
Yeah.
then ultimately us. And those are invisible for I would say those are invisible forces that
Mhm.
are embedded into civic engagement organizations,
Mhm.
and they're harder to see and yet we experience them all the time. That's what I would say.
Yeah, yeah, it is an interesting question of where did it all start?
Yeah.
And I guess at some level, if you go back to the basic needs of living beings, beyond humans, it's about safety, approval, and control. In some ways, I see the expressions of power as being ways of meeting those basic needs. And I believe that if we can use power in different ways to get those needs met, and we can use it
Mm,
in ways that seek to control and exploit others
yeah.
so that we can have safety, approval, and control, or we can use our power so that more people, I idealistically, all people could feel safe and could feel worthy and could feel whole. And
Mm.
so I guess at a very cosmic level for me, this just goes back and back and back and back a very long way.
And what do you think our internal power is, and how do you know yours?
Well, I think the question for me has really only become more conscious relatively recently. So as I have been writing this book that has emerged out of all of this, it's really given me a chance to explore my relationship to my own power much much more closely.
Mm,
And as you said, most people don't spend their days thinking about this, whereas for me right now, it feels ever present. So one of the ways that I know mine is both through kind of looking back at the times in my life when I have felt a sense of my own power. And maybe it would be helpful if power is such a big word. It's such a big
right.
topic. And the way that I think about it is, power as a sense of, well, maybe in two ways. So power is a sense of agency, right?
Mm,
The belief and the recognition that in any situation that I always have choice, and the desire to really want to use that choice ultimately for good, which means to do things that advance not only myself, but that really advance the people around me, that advance the systems that I'm in, so that more people, so that our planet, is benefiting from the choices that I make.
I love that. So one is agency, and that you said there was another way you
So
know
one is
power.
agency. Yes, thank you. I
That's
lost my
okay. It
train
was
there.
fascinating,
The
but I want to get back to the other. Curious.
Well, and the other, and this is an idea that if you're familiar with Riane Eisler and any of her work around dominator culture, and this is it made me think of this when you mentioned the idea of like power as domination. I think we live in a world right now at this particular moment in time where a lot of the examples of power that are certainly in the media and in the news, we are seeing a lot of demonstrations of power as power over, power as control, power that divides, power that is zero sum, where there are winners and losers. And for me right now, it's really important that we realize there's an opportunity here to kind of take back control. Take back control. I'm realizing the irony as I'm saying that, but to kind of reclaim the idea of power with others, right? Power to create outcomes that benefit all and not just some or a few. So I think the other thing that I think about a lot when I'm thinking about power and how I'm using my power. And then, so I do a lot of work with leaders and teams inside organizations. And even if I'm not talking about power overtly in those settings, that's the lens that I bring to my
Right.
work is in those particular systems. How can the work that I'm doing and the way that I work with the leaders and teams that I work with, where power just inherently exists, how can that be a vehicle for helping people get more in touch with what good power looks like for them and to use it in that way. I'll give you maybe an example. I was working with a leader who was the head of a large research institute, and he was very uncomfortable with his own authority, and because he didn't have a lot of examples in his life of authority being used in ways that left space for other people. And through the work that we did and through helping him get in touch with what good authority would look like, with what good power would look like, it really helped inform how he made decisions, how he developed his own people, and just kind of expanded his own sense of who he was as a leader and the legacy that he wanted to leave and what that was for.
I really appreciate what you're saying. I was at a conference that said a boss says I and a leader says we. And there's Heather McGee's book, The Sum of Us, which is indeed zero.
Mm.
Instead of zero sum game, the sum of
Mm.
us.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I do have one more question for you, though. I think that there is, whether it's a distinction or not, like a distinction around agency and intention to include
Mhm,
the whole, because we are part of a
mhm,
whole.
mm.
And then how does one actually access the felt sense of generative power inside of them to act from there and not just
Mm.
perform?
I think for me that is, probably another thing that has been a really big shift for me over the last few years. I talked a little bit about my story and being in challenging situations at a really young age where I felt like performing was, the fake it till you make it was probably a big part of how I was able to keep going in the world, not feeling confident, not feeling equipped to be in the environments that I was in, but
Mm.
feeling like I had to show up, I had to perform the things that were driving me. And maybe part of this is just the benefit of age and wisdom, that part of it is you start to realize that for me, as I've gotten to know myself more and grow in my own confidence, I think that sense of trusting that it's funny, I'm realizing, like, it's even happening right now. There are times in the past where being on this podcast with you, that drive to perform, that drive to
Mm.
to show up and do it right or do it well, that would have been at the forefront. And now there's just this trusting that whatever shows up is exactly what's meant to be here.
That you already have
Uh,
it inside you.
yeah, that I already have it inside me, right? And whatever standard, and maybe this comes back to our conversation about the invisible systems of power. I think when, for me, one of the systems that was really prevalent for me, it was this like perfection driven system where, and there's plenty of research about, girls especially, and the way that they're raised in these systems that create these ideas that it always has to be perfect. You have to look perfect, you have to be perfect, you have to right, act perfect, and all of these things. That's, the being driven so much by that system is part of what disconnected me
Yes.
from that inner knowing,
Yeah, that's beautifully
right?
said. Beautifully, beautifully said. I think one of the tenets of white supremacy is perfectionism. It's unrealistic, and we're all underneath
Yeah,
that umbrella. And then you bring gender in and all of it, it just
that's right.
compounds, right? And so
It just compounds. Yeah.
compounds it. It's so one of the things I actually love about interviewing you is that you pause and you wait and you listen before you speak, which is interrupting that I've got to get it right. I've got to say the right thing.
Mm,
You're actually listening to yourself while you're speaking. And
mm,
I really appreciate that. It makes it
mm,
more authentic, more alive, more generative, and more impactful, honestly.
mm,
It makes me
mm.
trust you more.
Thank you. Thank you
Yeah,
for saying that.
yeah, and I appreciate how you've had to interrupt that invisible system, right? So you
Yeah.
can be who you are. Like it's like,
Absolutely. Absolutely, Suzanne. It's interesting because I know that I tend to be, kind of thoughtful and deliberative in how I speak. And there have been times when I've received feedback or maybe even just given myself feedback or my own self-judgment that it's not dynamic enough, it's not interesting enough. And
oh,
I think part of this, I love some of the work, the author who wrote the book Quiet, even this idea that started around the turn of the last century that valued extroverted behaviors more.
right.
It kind of instilled in me some of these ideas that it's not okay to go slow, it's not okay to be thoughtful. And now, as you said, I think we live in a time where everything feels like it's fast, fast, fast. And to really be in a conversation where you feel like you can connect to yourself and you feel
Yes.
like you can connect to your partner, it's refreshing for me.
It's great. I love it. I really appreciate it. I'm like, oh, I'm so because this is our first time having a conversation like this. So I'm
Yeah.
discovering you.
Yes.
And I find it quite refreshing, and I'm sure our listeners are too. And
Thank
I
you.
really believe you're bringing to us. I'm so glad you're writing this book, number one. And you're bringing a lot of distinctions here and a lot of ways of expanding automatic thinking and discovery, which I think is very, very powerful. We are going to have to wind down for today. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
being here.
Thank you.
I do have a question for you. What do you think the purpose for life is?
One of the other things that I just love to play with sometimes is turning off my analytical mind, which really wants to take over all the time, and just like listening to what comes up. And the word that just came up, if I didn't overanalyze your question here, is love. I really, really believe there are lots and lots of challenges in the world. So I don't want to say this in a way that diminishes or dismisses the seriousness of what's happening all over the world. And at the same time, there is so much beauty in the world. And I think being able to hold both of those truths at the same time, being able to hold the truth that there's both suffering and devastation and all of that, and that there is beauty and joy and love, being able to navigate life with both of those truths and find ways to be in whatever circumstances you find yourself in, finding ways to be on the side of beauty and truth and love. For me, that's at least one of the purposes.
I love that. Thank you so much. How can people get a hold of you?
Probably the best way is my website, www.avia leadership.com. You can learn more about my work and you
Mhm.
can connect with me there.
And when is this book happening?
Oh my goodness, that is the million-dollar question. It's the goal is to have, I think I'd say the manuscript is probably two-thirds complete. I really want to get it done this year. Sadly, I'm not a full-time writer. I also run a
Right.
business and have lots of clients, but that's what I'm putting out there, Suzanne, that by 2027 we'll have it.
So get back in touch with me closer to
Okay.
the book launch, and let's have you back on.
Okay. Sounds
Sound
good.
Thank you, listeners, for being here today. This is the Purpose for Life podcast. I'm your host, Suzanne Roberts, author of It's Deeper Than That, founder of The Great Reconnection. Thank you for listening. Subscribe, and we look forward to having you back with us.